ATSSA. Anybody want to make any guesses? ATSSA.
American Traffic Safety Association.
Oh, you read it.
I remember things.
And he still got it wrong.
And he did. So you're close. American Traffic Safety Services Association.
Oh, they have services too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Nate is joining us right now. Nate, good morning to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Well, thanks. And I'm not going to try to explain American Traffic Safety Services because since you work there, I would imagine that you have a much better idea of how to tell somebody in a couple of sentences what American Traffic Safety Services Association does.
Absolutely. Happy to. So the American Traffic Safety Services Association, very long name, also known as ATSSA, our members manufacture, distribute, and install roadway safety infrastructure equipment. So when you're driving in your car down the road, it's nearly everything on top of the road that is protecting you from driving off the road or getting into a crash.
So you're not the orange barrel guy.
No, we are. So that's exactly right. A lot of people think we are like the seat belts or the distracted driving folks, but we're actually the infrastructure side. So cones and barrels, pavement markings, guardrail, traffic signs and signals, those types of infrastructure equipment is what our members both manufacture and install. So they're contractors and manufacturers.
Do you actually supply, for instance, let's just say, and we're all very familiar with the orange barrels. Do you also supply the instructions of where to place the barrels during a construction zone?
We do training to tell people how to close down a lane and set up a work zone. From your question, it sounds like maybe there's more opportunity for training out there.
Yes, there is.
It's we do train a whole bunch of people, thousands of people every single year. But think about the sheer number of road construction work zones that are out there, and there's a lot more to do, certainly, especially with influx of federal funding on infrastructure projects coming in the next few years.
Now, do you work with the state? Do you work with the cities? Who do you work with? Whoever is head of the construction project?
Contractors?
So, yeah, our member companies are working with state DOTs, counties, cities, in some cases tribes, but especially out west, sort of the units of government that are funding the specific projects. Some of our members do airport work as well. And the federal government owns relatively few road miles comparatively to states and local units of government. So our members are working directly with those governmental agencies, to deploy those work zones around the country and make sure that they're done in a safe way.
Okay, so step us through how you integrate what you do with these companies, these contractors that are building an extension or a widening project or fixing a huge issue with the concrete. How do you integrate with those companies? So
me specifically, and I think you're going to love this, from hearing part of your show earlier, is, I wear two hats at ATSSA. I work with our members to make sure that, the industry is moving in the right direction and we're supplying everything that they need to get the job done and make sure that we're moving towards zero deaths on the roads. But the other hat that I wear is I'm a lobbyist in Washington, D.C.
Oh,
so,
my gosh.
And
you wait a minute, and you admit that.
I know. I mean, I'm the guy wearing a blazer on a Saturday morning. So, I think I've only been heckled off an airplane once for that. So, it's a pretty good track record.
How to make
I'm sorry?
How to make friends and influence politicians.
That's right. So in that role, I work with U.S. Department of Transportation folks, people on Capitol Hill, members of Congress and staff, and really try and ensure that there are federal policies that are sort of the basis of making sure that roads are as safe as they can potentially be. And of course, that there is funding there as well. And so how does that work? If it's a federally funded project, not all projects are, but specifically if it's a federally funded one, Congress authorizes X amount of money for road projects. The states get a chunk. Each state gets a chunk of that money, and then the states have a plan. They have a transportation plan. Each state does about what they want to accomplish with their funds, and then they bid out projects to start ticking off that list that's there in their state plan. And then our members bid on those projects. Sometimes they win them, sometimes they don't, and then they go get the job done. And so it's actually a pretty direct circle from federal investment, in this case, on a federal project, federal investment to boots on the ground, private contractors getting the job done.
And then they do it all over again because every highway in Houston's been under construction for the 20 years I've lived here.
I think they're stealing the road.
It is. We liken it to holding an old house or an old car for that matter. You don't just put money into it right up front and call it a done deal. It's consistent.
Yes, it's an ongoing project. So once the project is let, the contractor, the company's got it, and they know what they've got to now go do. Is that when you come in and do training and say, okay, if you're going to do this kind of work, this is what you need to do as far as setting your cones and barrels out? Or you help them figure that out?
Nearly every state, and I'm actually going to say every state, has some level of required training. So it's not necessarily just at the tail end. These companies have to ensure that their workers are trained consistently. And in some states, they have to be certified as well. And so it's not just, oh, hey, we have this project that we've won. We got to go make sure our workers are trained, although there's a piece of that. Those companies and the agencies have to ensure that their men and women who are actually out on the road are consistently trained and continue to keep that training up to make sure that they're aware of anything new that's coming out. There's actually, interestingly enough, especially in work zones, a lot of new technology, especially related to connected automated vehicles that's out there right now. You as a driver might not even pick up the fact that you're driving through what we call a smart work zone. But it's there may be, you were talking about those barrels before. There's a technology out there that there's literally computers in some of those barrels that are really relaying information about traffic back up to the agency that's controlling the project or a transportation center to ensure that the flow of traffic is as seamless as possible. Now, again, more work to be done there. But that's how we start understanding how long that queue is. Do we need to divert people around the work zone because the queue is getting too long? Is there a crash in the queue upstream due to the traffic because of the work zone? So these smart technologies in work zones is really what sort of that future, especially as cars begin to talk to infrastructure and continue to do that more and more, that we know that car that might be self-driving at some point, that Tesla, that
Cadillac Cruise.
Yeah.
Cadillac Cruise, you're absolutely right. That car knows that there's a person up there. That was a big concern of ours when connected automated vehicles started coming on the scene. Was, okay, we get that they can interact with a traffic signal, that's a stationary object or a stop sign or a marking on the road. But how do they interact with short-term, striping operations? You're going down a street and there's the pavement marking truck laying down the stripe as you go, but the whole work zone's sort of moving with it. How does the car interact with that when traffic's going 65 miles an hour or higher and that operation's going 3 to 5 miles an hour? And so we have more work to do there, certainly with the automakers. But that smart technology and cones and barrels and communication is the basis of that.
Do you have anything to do with the big electronic signs? I know there's several by my house where I live that they give warnings out either for a lost person or fog ahead or something. Big electronic ones that are in the air. Do you work with those folks as well, or is that you?
Our members do the portable ones. So not the fixed overhead ones, but the ones that are connected to a work zone that are on a trailer that might say, work zone, 3 miles ahead or something like that.
But these are actually mounted in the ground on large poles that they give information.
So those are the ones that are there permanently.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a state. Yes, because we see some, we've got some, obviously a 2-lane road, there with a bridge. There'll be a sign out there. I've got a couple of them over in my area that takes about a year, but they've got signs out there that it becomes a 1-lane for the bridge crossing, and they've got a traffic light set up to control the traffic instead of a man standing out there with his stop and go deal. But we've also got some of those, the beach roads like that where they do it. But it's moving. Every day it's a little bit further down the road where this guy is saying you got to stop and you got to go because it's one lane for the next quarter mile.
Yeah, one of the newer that you're starting to see them more and more are essentially automated traffic signals for work zones, where they're on sort of a boom on a trailer and they're a traffic signal, they're lights.
Right.
But the great part, you can use them in great, a great application of that is if you've got a bridge that has to go down to one lane and you don't necessarily have great line of sight from one end of the bridge to the other. You can utilize that, especially in a rural area where you don't need a flagger 24 hours a day. And the signals talk to each other so they know when one is green and one is red. And you can control traffic that way. So that's a great example of that technology really helping out. It also helps out because our industry, like every other industry out there, is facing a workforce shortage. We can't get folks who want, especially down in Texas, right? Who wants to work road construction in July and August. It's hot and it's hard work and you're long hours. You can make really good money, but it's been a challenge getting workers out on the road to do road construction. So if we have technologies that help, push safety forward without having to wait for people to come on board and be workers, that's going to be an added benefit to the driver as well.
What can we look forward to in the near future? New technology that's going to help traffic get through these construction zones, which are typically huge bottlenecks. I know that we've got this massive project on I-10 out at the Brazos River, just to the west of Houston, and the traffic is an absolute nightmare out there. It's been going on for years, and it's probably going to be at least another couple of years before they finish it. So what's going to help us in the near future that we're not familiar with yet?
Part of it is going to be intrusion detection system. So that's not going to fix all of the traffic related to a work zone. But what it will help fix is if you don't have that secondary intrusion into a work zone. When I talk about that, that is a crash related to the work zone. So there's a work zone already there. People are driving. Someone's likely distracted. They drive into the work zone. God forbid they kill somebody. If we can eliminate sort of those second iteration crashes, then cars will be able to much more easily get through. So there are, on the market today, there are intrusion systems, but those are becoming better and better with every passing year. And they range from extraordinarily sophisticated to a little bit smaller. I'll give you an example. Is Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, which is a kind of a competitor to down where you guys are, the Texas Transportation Institute. Virginia Tech has their own, but they've got a great project going on right now that's still in the project phase with Audi. And they have a detection system within the work zone, and especially also in the vests that the workers wear that are smart. They have little diodes in them that can talk to traffic. And it pushes messages to the Audi who is traveling towards the work zone, and it flashes up on the dashboard exactly as to what's going on. So that there's a lane closure, or that there's traffic ahead, or that there's a worker ahead. And so that the driver is actually knowing real-time, accurate information and what's happening ahead of them in that particular work zone. Now, that is only Audi specific at this point, but I think those are the types of things you're going to see in the not so distant future when it comes to work zones. If we can get as much information to that driver as early as possible and ensure it's accurate, then that's going to go a long way in making that a more seamless situation.
Interesting.
I say accurate because how many times have we all driven through when we see a sign that says work zone ahead, and either there's no work zone ahead or there hasn't been a worker there in 3 or 4 days. It's pretty clear. So we have to make sure that the information we're telling the driver is accurate, that they trust it.
Well, that's
In real
understandable
time.
too, because like we've had some rains for the past 4 days here, and no construction crews I'm sure there's some out there doing larger work with bigger equipment and things, but so far as lane closures and things, they pretty much go away during the rain. I mean, they don't work in an area that potential floods and things.
Absolutely. But you're a person who thinks critically. A lot of people out there don't draw the conclusion from point A to point B.
So are you guys also working with the infrastructure of car-to-car communication, as they're moving towards the smart car and how cars are going to be talking to each other understanding time and distance between the vehicles and then on the road as well. Is that something that's in your bailiwick of things to do?
And to that point, you said there's computers in some of the barrels. Is there technology to have that barrel talk to the car?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, yes, we're very involved. We represent construction industry companies and that particular industry. But when it comes to the construction trade associations and groups that are out there, we're one of the most forward advanced there. And I would say that just because when the car is talking to the road, it's our stuff that they're talking to. It's talking to or trying to read the marking on the road, or it's talking to the cone or the barrel or the traffic signal or the traffic sign. And so absolutely we are involved in that. And that's been a concern because, the ability to deploy some of these connected communication systems has been around for a long time. And we're only now just being able to more adequately deploy projects out there. And so we are strongly pushing DOTs to get some projects out there to really test where we need to be going so that we can, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit, but that we can ensure that we are using the spectrum, and that's what allows us to utilize and talk from car to car or car to infrastructure. It's regulated by the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, but we've got allocated bands of spectrum that we can use, but we've got to use them, or else we're not going to have them, because the FCC will look at it and say, hey, you've got it, you haven't used it, someone else needs it. So we've got to be able to deploy these projects soon so that we can continue to make the case that we need that dedicated bandwidth to have those safe transportation communications.
Real quick, because we're going to run out of time here, and there's lots to talk about, I think. But, there's you mentioned that Audi's got a project going with the vests and stuff. Somebody's got to do some standardization for all these projects, because when these anonymous cars get out there talking to each other, I mean, they got to talk the same language.
I feel like you read my talking points that I use on Capitol Hill all the time because, man, you want to be like
I'm for hire if you need an assistant.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. The bad example I use, the example that we don't want to be, is automated tolling from 25 years ago or 30 years ago. I'm originally from New England, and unlike Texas, you can drive about 2.5 hours and be in 5 different states. And back when automated tolling first started coming out, what we now know as Easy Pass, up in New England, there were several different companies in each state. So each state had a different company that did their own little transponder, and they didn't talk to each other. And so if you wanted to drive from, say, New Jersey to Maine, you had to have like several transponders in your car and flop them out to get through the toll booth. So that's the example we don't want to do. We've got to make sure that everything talks to each other, but we have to figure out that balance between federal, which would give us that uniformity across the country, and states liking to do things a little bit different than their neighboring state. And so there is a balance there, but we've got to have that foundation that's the same, so that when you are driving across the country, your car can talk to every work zone that's out there. Without that, that's a really serious safety impact.
And do you look at as well integration into vehicle function? Like, the emergency braking systems that they have today? Do you see that integration with the auto manufacturers as well?
Yeah. So when we work with the auto manufacturers, it's more on that infrastructure side. And so that, the automated braking is more in the automaker side of the house. But when we are talking to them, we're saying, okay, you're going to do that automated braking, but what's causing that automated braking? Is there a way that we can develop a work zone, that doesn't require that hard stop? Or one of the other technologies that's out there is laying aggregate, little tiny fine pieces of typically bauxite on top of the pavement, and making, obviously it's epoxied and it's down there and it's permanent, but that raises the level of friction on the road. And so if you do have that hard stop, making sure that the car will actually stop and not slide into the car in front of it. But those types of technologies are out there as well. So it's talking with the automakers to make sure that their car can talk to the road, and what is it that car maker needs from the infrastructure to best deploy that connected vehicle.
Nate, we're running out of time. We thank you so much for joining us today.
Great
we could
information.
talk to you for the entire rest of the show. Absolutely fascinating subject, and a very pleasant surprise on this Saturday morning. I had no idea that you were involved in all of this stuff, and let's have you on again soon. Would you please stay in touch with us?
Absolutely, would love to.
Thank you again, and best day to you.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Nate Smith, Vice President of Engagement at ATSSA.
I'm going to think of Nate every time I go through a construction zone.
That's right. American Traffic Safety Services Association.
Good
Fascinating.
information.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. I got a couple of stories.